Well, hello and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we chronicle transcendent truth by traveling further up and further into the classic works of children's literature with C.S. Lewis as our guide.
Today is the second annual C.S. Lewis Reading Day. It's a great day to reflect on the life of Daniel's favorite author and find time to read his words.
Not yours, though. Okay, fair enough.
Well, I haven't read all his stuff yet. Jury's still out.
Well, we have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is I sound like this. The good news is that we will not have to hear my voice as much because we are joined today
by Ben Lansing. Welcome, Ben.
Yes, hello. So glad to be here.
The Reverend Ben Lansing is an artist from Richmond, Virginia, and the creator of the online art series Our Church Speaks, which includes the new podcast, Our Church Speaks. He is an Anglican deacon and a lifelong student of the history of art and religion. He loves sharing the history of the global church through art and storytelling. All of his work is available at ourchurchspeaks.com. He lives in Richmond with his wife, Bethany, in a house full of books.
And what that did not mention, because it came straight from the back of your brand new book, is your brand new book, which is Our Church Speaks, which you wrote with former guest of the show, Father DJ Murata.
Yes.
Who was on back in the Silver Chair. We talked about Puddleglum's Big Speech is when we had Dan on.
That was a great episode.
Yeah, it was a ton of fun. It was a good time. During that time, we recorded that during COVID, I think, like right around then. And so we all had to be in separate rooms in our own houses, despite the fact that we all live about 2 or 3 miles apart.
Oh my goodness.
And now here you are, we're all together.
We're all together here.
We didn't invite Dan, but
oh yeah,
the three of us are together.
That can be another episode.
Yeah, maybe,
all 4 of us are together.
Maybe another time. But Ben, we are so excited to welcome you to the show and to talk about C.S. Lewis on his day, not only of the C.S. Lewis Reading Day,
right,
but of the day that we commemorate him in the Anglican Church.
Yes, November 29th.
Yes, which I think we'll get to this maybe a little bit, is not always the norm because the 29th is his birthday, not his death day, which is a little odd actually for us.
It is unusual.
But something else happened on his death day, and it kind of made the news.
Yeah, I don't think
did make the news.
I don't think JFK's assassination is why they're like, guys, we can't put it on the 22nd. Yeah. I assume, again, we'll get to this in a moment, that it was probably already taken.
Yes, and this is a bit complicated. Calendars can be complicated. So in certain parts of the Anglican Communion, Lewis is commemorated on the 22nd. In our province, where I am ordained, the Anglican Church in North America, they moved his date to the 29th because the 22nd is the historic date for Saint Cecilia.
Oh.
So they gave precedent to an early martyr.
That's fair enough.
Versus a modern author.
Like, he's the new guy. He's got to earn it.
He's the new guy, yes.
Give it 400 more years.
Yeah,
check back
maybe
in.
so. Maybe in 400 years, they'll give him the 22nd.
I want to hear more about the house full of books, which has 7 fewer books because you brought a knapsack full of books.
You, like Father Christmas, you arrived and gave us presents. I've got a Catechism of the Catholic Church, complete and updated.
Yes.
And the complete collected letters of C.S. Lewis, volumes 1 and 2. And volume 3 is forthcoming, I assume.
Let's hope. Yes. I'm always collecting books. I'm always buying books.
Yes.
And then sometimes I end up with extra copies of books that I love, or I am needing to clear room on my bookshelf for more books. And so I'm always not only buying them, but trying to find people who will take them from me. So, yeah.
And I believe one of the times I was over at your place, you not only have an incredible Tolkien collection of all the brand new, are they Alan Lee who does the illustrated ones?
They've recently put out some amazing editions of not only all of Tolkien's works that were published during his lifetime, but then there's also this immense collection called The History of Middle-earth. It's 12 volumes, and it's never been released in illustrated editions.
No, it hasn't, yeah.
And when I say illustrated, there aren't actual illustrations in the book, but the covers have these gorgeous illustrations.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a misnomer.
Yeah.
When I hear an illustrated book,
and
I open it up and there's no pictures, I'm a little disappointed.
Very few pictures.
Like when you buy a book with illuminated text, but then you still have to use a flashlight to read it.
I've never thought about that, but that is disappointing.
It is. A real letdown.
But so on top of that, which I've always appreciated at your house, you also, I believe, are working on getting every single book that Lewis ever published.
I am, yes.
You're not quite there yet.
Some of his academic books I still have not gotten my hands on, but yeah, hopefully one day I'll get there.
I've used you as an example. We have people come over for like small group or just friends come over for dinner, and they look and see an entire row or two of the shelf in our house that's like all Lewis books, and they're like, that seems a bit much. I'm like, well, have you met Ben? Because he has way more than I do.
Yeah,
all right,
you just need someone to compare it to.
So I'm not that bad. And it's also great because whenever Anna starts to very wisely say, hey, like maybe the kids should have some space on the bookshelf. And I selfishly am like, no. They can just throw them on their bed.
That's too high up for them.
Oh, hush. I'm like, well, Ben, he has more than I do. So I use you as the scapegoat in my own house.
Yes.
How many books is this? What are we talking? How many? What did the total be?
You know what? I actually meant today to count them.
Okay.
I don't know why, but I ended up not doing it. I wish I had now. But it's upwards. It's over 30.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a lot. It doesn't take up nearly as much space on a shelf as all of Tolkien's books because Tolkien just took constant notes and he was constantly writing essays for no one in particular, but just to expand his imagination. And so, but it still is a considerable amount of books that Lewis put out. And they're all special to me in different ways. So I love Lewis's writings, and probably I would say he has had more influence on my faith imagination, you might say, than any other author. I've been reading him since I was probably 10 years old and have never really stopped. I've always kind of been going back through, running my hands over those books or rereading books. So,
What was that first interaction with Lewis when you were 10? Do you remember what that was?
Well, even before I was 10, before I was reading his books, my dad rented, I think it was from a Blockbuster video, the BBC version of the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
We've heard of it.
Yes.
I watched those on VHS from the church library.
Yes. How did you feel about them?
At the time, the very first time that I was watching them, I thought they were great.
Yeah.
We watched them recently as part of this podcast.
We only can tell you how we feel about the first one because all the other ones are behind a paywall. But no, I'm just kidding. So go ahead, Phil.
The first one I thought was great. The beavers are funny as an adult.
Yes.
Some of the stuff
large.
really pulls you out of the story. We struggled so much with one of them.
Caspian. We didn't like Caspian.
Caspian was tough, but the one with Puddleglum.
Oh, I know. I love Silverchair.
Maybe it was. There was something that we really.
The only one I did not like was Prince Caspian, and that's because the entire book is adapted into 55 minutes.
Right.
And so
it was very short.
They had to cut some stuff
it's
out.
not. I like all of them, despite the fact that they've aged not super well, but they really capture Lewis, I think, well.
Yeah.
And I've loved watching them with my oldest, and I can't wait to show them to my daughter too when she's old enough.
Yeah, even when I watched them in the early 90s, I did see a lot of things that even at the time I thought, these special effects are not good.
Yeah.
Even as like an 8-year-old. But there was this enchantment in them that was very compelling. And I think that what they did well in these BBC miniseries movies was that they were able to capture the spirit of Lewis and communicate that spirit in a way that compels you to want more. They only did, I think, 4 of the books in Narnia. But by the time it was over, I was like, are there more movies? And my dad said, no, but there are more books. And I knew I was going to have to read them. I ended up finding some of them in a library, and I didn't know what order to read them in. And so I just picked up one that was available because some of them had been checked out. I think I started with The Horse and His Boy.
Okay.
Okay. As long as you pick up The Last Battle, I think it's okay.
I was going to say, we've heard of people starting with The Last Battle.
I think The Last Battle was maybe the third one, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, that's okay. As long as it's not number 1.
But yeah, I found it almost more magical not knowing where I was going to end up in the story and not knowing which order to read them in. And I think unlike any other book, those books pulled me in a way that, you know, as a 10-year-old kid, it was all I could think about while I was reading them.
Wow.
Yeah, so those books, I knew there was something. And the thing about Lewis is when you read one of his books, especially Narnia, if you read it as a child, you're not satisfied with just reading it. You want to live in that story.
Sure.
And there's something more about it than just, oh, this world is magical, but it is a way of looking at even our world in a way that is enchanted. It's a way that our modern society does not teach us how to look at the world. Lewis has a wisdom that's coming from something beyond what our current culture gives us on a daily basis.
That's right, yeah.
And it's a vision of the world that, I know I keep saying this word enchanted, but it's actually one that's infused with the wisdom of the creator himself. And that reality, I think, helped to spark my faith as a Christian and made me want to dig deeper into what is it exactly that Lewis is talking about here. So, yeah, the next book that I wanted to read more books after I'd finished all the Narnia books, and my parents gave me, I'm not sure why they gave me this book, but it was Letters to Malcolm.
Wow.
Which is
It's an interesting choice.
you'd think it would have been Mere Christianity or something.
Yeah. How much of your childhood was based on what was available at the time?
Maybe a lot.
Very true.
This
yeah.
dark time in our country, the early 90s.
Yeah, books were hard to find back then.
Yeah.
No,
Literally because we didn't have a good searching system. We had plenty of books.
true.
We just couldn't find them.
Yeah, that's true. I tried to read Letters to Malcolm as an 11-year-old, and I actually still have that exact copy of the book. And there's a lot in it that I was not able to wrap my mind around. But even in that book, I could sense that there was a personality behind the pages that I really liked. And it was the same personality that had written these Narnia books that I loved so much. And soon after, my dad bought me 3 paperback copies of the Space Trilogy.
Ooh.
Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandria, and That Hideous Strength.
Yeah.
And boy, at least the first 2 really pulled me in. I had to get a little bit older before That Hideous Strength really resonated with me. It's one of my favorites of his now.
Of course. I love it so much too.
But yeah, so I ever since have been buying books by him, reading them, rereading them. And really his imagination has done a lot to introduce me to the personalities that I am drawing for Our Church Speaks. My art series where I'm drawing different saints and then writing their biographies, Lewis is constantly referencing in many of his books the great Christian tradition.
Okay.
And he will just name drop all the time. And when you're not familiar with the names, it's easy just to kind of gloss over those. But if you take the time to really look up who are these people he's name dropping, he's kind of letting you know this wisdom that I'm communicating here, these insights, they don't start with me. I'm part of this great stream of a Christian tradition that the modern world has largely forgotten about. And he's kind of inviting us almost through the wardrobe
I love it.
to enter into something so much bigger about the reality of how to live out the Christian faith. That when you're baptized in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, this isn't just your faith with Christ, it is that, but you're also baptized into a family. So now your faith is part of this large family legacy that goes all the way back 2,000 years. And the subtitle of my book is a devotional of saints from every era and place. So this idea that we're part of a family from every era of history and every inhabited continent, this faith is being lived out. So Lewis kind of helped me to realize what this legacy was and want to dig into it deeper. So, yeah.
Wow.
Well, let's talk a little bit about this idea of saints, because the idea we wanted to, I guess, investigate with you here with us is this. You've got this book on saints. You've got this project you've been doing as an illustrator as well too,
Right.
an artist. And Lewis is been, included really almost from the beginning. I remember you doing your work on Lewis, I guess, years ago at this point. And so a question I have for you is maybe, we have listeners all across the spectrum. We have listeners who are not Christian at all. We have listeners who are, quite familiar with the idea of saints. We have listeners who've really don't know much of what that is, or maybe they even have a little bit of I'm not so sure about this.
Right.
All right. So could you just help us understand what are saints? What is this idea? When did Christians start remembering them? When did we start? How do you become one? All these. Help us understand saints, and then we can talk about Lewis as and I'm putting in quotations here, a saint, as in quotations.
Yeah, saint's kind of a loaded word, isn't it?
It's very. That's why I'm making you do this.
Yes. There's a saint named Dorothy Day. She lived in the 20th century, and she actually has a quote where she said, "Don't call me a saint. I don't want to be dismissed that easily," because we tend to assume that a saint is almost someone that we can't relate to. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're a human being that just never did anything bad, and they're just squeaky clean. And how can you possibly have anything in common with someone like that? Because that is an assumption that unfortunately I think some people have portrayed about saints, but I think, and I confess, I love to give lots of context to things.
No, please do.
Stop me if I'm going too long here, but
this is what this is all about.
This is what it's all about. But I do love history, and I think that history can sometimes give us a bit more insight into words that we use that we don't really think about what we're assuming when we use them. Mm-hmm. Saint is a great example. So first of all, in Scripture, the word saint is found throughout Scripture. And it's usually referring to either living people who are following Jesus Christ, but it can also refer to people who are in heaven. That word saint is applied to Christians who have died and are now in the presence of God. Okay. So Christians who are alive today can validly be called saints if they are walking in faith, in the faith of Christ, with their faith in Christ. But there is this distinction that is made. Really, it began in the early church. Now, in the early church, Christianity was sort of a new thing, and there was a lot of suspicion about what is Christianity. When it would come into an area, maybe a disciple would bring Christianity for the first time into, say, a Roman city where they're worshiping gods like Jupiter, and they would see these new people called Christians, and there would be rumors about who are these people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the rumors would be that they were cannibals, and because they were hearing that these people were eating someone's body and drinking their blood in worship. Yeah. Or that they were insurrectionists, because these early Christians were calling this man named Jesus their Lord and their God instead of the emperor. And so it didn't take long in Christian history for persecutions to break out against the church, where the neighbors would be suspicious. They would report these Christians to the authorities. Mm-hmm. And there even came a point where there was an empire-wide declaration that the Roman Empire was going to round people up, arrest them, and demand that they renounce Jesus Christ, and instead give offering to the emperor. And the worst of these persecutions is called the Great Persecution of Diocletian, where it was just particularly bad. A lot of very famous Christians died during this time period. A lot of famous Christians served the church during this time period. People like St. Nicholas, mm-hmm. We call him Santa Claus now. He was a historic figure, served the church then. There are people like Lucy, for example, who maybe her, she's the namesake.
I've heard that name before.
Yeah, you've heard that name before. She was a martyr during this persecution of Diocletian. And anyway, while Christians were giving their lives for Christ, there became a habit in the church of marking the date of the death of that Christian. So Lucy, for example, she was martyred on December the 13th.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since, the church has remembered Lucy on the 13th of December. And they started to consider her particularly noteworthy because of her example that she gave in her struggle with the world, the flesh, and the devil. In her struggle with sin, against sin, and against the powers of evil, the light of Christ was particularly strong in this saint's life, Saint Lucy. And there are countless other examples, just like Saint Lucy, who died during this great persecution in the early church.
Mm-hmm.
And so this early church began this practice of remembering saints who died, gave their lives, and whose memory they wanted to preserve. And soon, the calendar was filled with many different saints who were all martyrs who had given their life for Christ. Now, this is a really interesting dimension of this, because as these saints are being remembered, they're also being treasured because they have these miracle working properties in some of their either their clothing or maybe a bone that's preserved from their body. And this may strike certain people, maybe if you're not Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, this may strike you as a little unusual. But it's really like, if you're living in a worldview that's defined by the Bible, this isn't that weird, because there's some precedent biblically for this kind of idea. I mean, think about the Old Testament, where a man's body is thrown onto the bones of Elisha, and this dead man comes back to life.
That's right, yeah.
Another example in the New Testament is Saint Paul. Oh, that's Saint Peter, actually. His handkerchief gets passed around.
Oh, I remember, yeah.
And people get healed by this handkerchief. So there's actually biblical precedent for the idea that someone who has led a faithful life in Christ, that either their clothing or some sort of relic of theirs, it has some sort of miraculous power. Now, over time, people began to remember not only martyrs, but also people who just lived lives of great holiness. And they began to be added to the calendar as well. Now, unfortunately, as time goes on, 1,000 years after the persecutions end, this idea of relics begins to take over from the actual devotional life that people were intended to have with these saints in their memory.
It kind of began to supersede.
It did.
Actual, it becomes almost idolatry to many people. Is that right? Is that what we're thinking of it?
In Hebrews 12, we're told we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, and it's talking about all of the saints who have come before. And this great cloud of witnesses is there to point us to Jesus. It says to run with endurance, looking to Jesus. And as more and more saints and their relics, accumulated, there began to be almost a marketplace for relics. Like, oh, I've got this particular relic that's going to help you with this issue. And it became more about getting things done that you want to accomplish in the world by finding the right trinket or knickknack, and looking to Jesus almost became a secondary thing by the time of the 16th century. And it's because of that many of the reformers and others who were living in the 16th century, they began to say, we really need to try to get back to what the original idea of the saints was, which is remembering people's lives that shone with particular brilliance the glory of Jesus Christ, so that we can then follow Christ all the more faithfully in our own lives. And that's when the calendar of saints was cut back a bit, and only particular.
It's got to be a tough call. Like who's getting taken out of this?
Who's getting taken out? Yeah, there was a lot of research that was done over the next few centuries about how many of these saints actually existed versus how many of them maybe were just legendary.
Yeah.
A lot of them actually did exist. That was the amazing thing.
That's cool.
Now, I am ordained in the Anglican Church, so we use the Book of Common Prayer in our worship. And Daniel, you and I go to the same church,
We
so
do.
you're familiar with this as well. And in the Book of Common Prayer, there is a calendar of saints that finds its origin in the ancient calendar of saints. And over time, they have added more modern saints as well. So people who have lived in the past few centuries are also part of the Book of Common Prayer's calendar of saints. So featured in this list of saints, of these, and again, I would say that a saint is someone who is remembered by the church because in their struggle with the world, the flesh, and the devil, and they did have struggles, they did sin, they did have weaknesses and their own fears, but in the midst of those things, the light of Christ was particularly brilliant. And the church wants to remember their example so that we can, in different ways, emulate their example. So anyway, there are modern saints, including in the more recent versions of the Book of Common Prayer. C.S. Lewis is in this calendar of saints.
Help me understand, though, for those of us in the Protestant tradition who, if you look through, and this is even true of not just Anglicans, but others in the Protestant tradition that look to the ancient church and that are closely following, apostolic succession, which I know aren't many of us in the Protestant tradition. But my question would be, why then do we have some people like St. Augustine, right? Uh-huh. St. Monica, and then we get to Lewis, and no one's going around. I hear you saying right now these are the modern saints, but we're not saying St. C.S. Lewis. Help me understand why the language is different for some of these saints and then other people, even the difference of when we venerate someone versus when we commemorate or remember someone.
Yeah.
And again, I know this is different because if you're Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, you have like St. John Paul II, right? Who you would not find in our book.
Right.
But you would find, obviously, there. I don't know what his day actually is, but I know he has a feast day.
Yes.
For our Roman Catholic brothers. Help me understand a little bit of this.
Yeah, well, this is a question that really taps into the nuances and differences between many of the different traditions of Christianity.
Which is why we're making you answer.
Which is why you're making me answer. And so, there is a difference between veneration and commemoration. In the Anglican tradition, we tend to commemorate, whereas veneration often implies speaking to that saint, asking that saint to talk to God for you, which has a long legacy in the Christian tradition. It's just not something that most Anglicans or Protestants do. So that's one little nuance.
That's
where,
helpful.
A Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, they may venerate a saint, even a modern saint, on their saint day. Whereas in the Anglican tradition, and also Lutherans also have
that's what I was thinking of. That's what I was implying earlier.
This is something that mainly in the Protestant tradition would be within the Anglican world or the Lutheran world. You don't see as many Presbyterians or Baptists keeping a calendar of saints, although I think it is time that we revive that tradition in many ways. But I can get into that later. So that's one thing I would point out. The other one is that the process of vetting who is a saint and who isn't is a bit more formalized in the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, especially in the Roman Catholic Church.
This is where you have to prove 2 miracles. Is that right? Something kind of that along those lines.
That's right. Yeah.
And what you're implying is that in the Anglicans, we're like, we pick you. You're fine. Come on down.
Well, it's still a little bit.
I'm just being facetious.
Yeah.
I know.
It's a little bit more than that.
The bishop will come after you, not me. So,
No. But it is much more casual in the Anglican tradition as to who we put in the book because in the Roman Catholic Church, for the vast majority of cases, the people who are considered for the Roman Catholic calendar of saints are confirmed Roman Catholics. They're not considering, say, a Presbyterian saint or an Anglican saint. Eastern Orthodox Church would be the same way. They're considering Eastern Orthodox Christians for their calendar of saints. Reason being, in both of these different traditions, there is a particular way that they have kind of endorsed as the way to follow Christ. And they're not as comfortable with saying, oh, well, here's someone who's not going that way. They've chosen a different tradition. Yeah. And so anyway, their calendars tend to be either completely of Roman Catholics or Eastern Orthodox. Because those processes of canonization are more formal, and because they are venerated with instead of commemorated,
sure,
you're just more often going to hear these particular saints who are commemorated or who are venerated in the Roman Catholic Church, Eastern Orthodox, referred to as Saint so-and-so.
Ah, interesting.
In the Anglican Church, our Book of Common Prayer calendar considers Christians of all different traditions. There are Roman Catholics in the calendar of the Book of Common Prayer. There are Eastern Orthodox. There are Presbyterians. There are Baptists. There are Anglicans. There is Assembly of God. I mean, all over the map. That's one reason I really love it. And actually, the calendar of saints in the Book of Common Prayer is what inspired my art series, Our Church Speaks.
Yeah, that's
because
right.
the people I'm drawing in this series are not, my list of favorite Christians. I am literally going through the calendar of saints in the Anglican Church, and I'm just illustrating them as they go. And one thing that really compelled me to do that was I was seeing all these people of different traditions who in different ways taught me about how to love Jesus. However, with all that said, because a lot of these people are not Roman Catholic, not Eastern Orthodox, they're not as frequently referred to with the title saint.
Interesting.
I'm a deacon, for example, and a deacon just means a servant. And as a Christian, we're all servants. But the church also specifies people with titles that in some ways kind of describe all of us. And saint is the same way. If there's been a formal process of vetting this person so that they can be held up as an example, then it is not uncommon to give them the title saint. And I would argue as a Christian, as a Anglican, that it is perfectly acceptable, if you'd like, to call C.S. Lewis Saint C.S. Lewis.
All right.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's
a very long answer.
No, that's a great.
Yeah,
that's it.
There's a lot to it.
Ended in a great place too. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's no doubt that you know your stuff. Do you feel like this is a question that you would have been able to answer before this book? It seems like you have been doing this kind of research for a long time, but
it is helpful for other people to know that Ben has no notes in front of him right now. He's just speaking extemporaneously.
Yeah.
Right from the heart.
Yeah, it's been a long process. And really, I feel like C.S. Lewis has been almost sitting right next to me while I've been doing a lot of just delightful reading and research over the past probably 15 years. I would say even in my late 20s, I didn't know much about church history or how we got from the New Testament to living as a Christian today. And it was probably in my late 20s.
Church history began in 1776.
Well, for me, it was...
1620, actually, maybe? The Pilgrims, or where was it for you?
Oh, man, when I was born.
Oh, church history was when I was born. There you go. I was trying to give you a little bit of the benefit
Church
of the
history began, I knew it began in the New Testament, and then there was a long period of time, and now here I am. And I wanted more than that.
Yeah, of course.
And C.S. Lewis kind of helped me realize there is more. There's so much more. And yet our modern society has forgotten about it. But there's this long legacy of faith. And I think sometimes it's also a little intimidating to you don't even know where to begin. So I used names, references that Lewis would make, and I started doing my research. And on his essay on the reading of old books, I read that. It may have been my mid-20s that I read that. It was soon after college. I was looking for ways just to continue my own personal education. And in that essay, he makes this argument that we have unfortunately allowed the great books to be relegated to the experts.
Mm-hmm.
And
We
the
don't
typical
read
person,
the great books. We read the experts talking about the great books.
That's
Exactly.
exactly right. And I said, yeah, I want to read one of these great books. And I think actually the first great book I picked up to kind of test if C.S. Lewis knew what he was talking about was a book that I had heard about, I had read about in my Roman history class, senior year of college, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations.
Meditations, yeah.
But I hadn't actually read it. And so I picked it up and I was like, okay, I'm going to see if C.S. Lewis is right. And I picked it up and I read it and it blew my mind.
It's actually relatively easy.
Yes.
I know, it's crazy.
It was so relevant to my life as a 20-something in the 21st century.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if this is what a Roman pagan emperor has to offer me, what did the Christians of this time have to offer? So I picked up Augustine, another reference that I had somehow gleaned from Lewis, and that got me hooked. And I started reading the ancient works of the church, and wow, it was so informative to my life. And I really credit Lewis for kind of being the start to just that little germ of a thought that made me just completely fascinated in the story of the church, how we got to where we are, why we in the 21st century even do theology the way we do, the assumptions we make, all of these things. They're part of what I love about church history.
So what's interesting is you've made this argument here that Lewis, it would be appropriate to refer to Lewis as a saint. And in your book, Our Church Speaks, you go through it's 52 chapters. I get what you call it, chapters.
There's we've taken 52 different saints who are commemorated throughout the church year. You know, I had mentioned that Saint Lucy died on December the 13th.
Okay.
So we have a different saint for every week of the year. That's why there's 52. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's a
so you can make a deck of cards later.
Oh, that's a brilliant idea.
Feels like slightly sacrilegious, but
well, then I thought, well, you don't have enough for the jokers, but then that would be weird.
yeah. Which saint is the Joker?
Who would be the Joker?
I think we all know who it would be.
I got to think about that. But yeah, so it's 52 different saints, one for each week of the year. And
you've written a little bit about each saint in there. And I'm particularly intrigued, though, because you're talking about Lewis, and Lewis is known so much as a writer and as a thinker. And when I picked the book up, when it just came out last month, I was intrigued by the fact that you spent most of the history section, and then Father Dan spends a good portion of the kind of devotional section.
Right.
You two wrote this together, speaking much more about his life,
right?
Which I thought was interesting because we, even people who don't know a ton about Lewis, they know some of his books, right? If you're a Christian, you're familiar with some of his stuff, and yet y'all focused in on his life. And so I'm just curious, what about his life do you think serves as this particularly important and potent example of a godly life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In some ways, Lewis's life was kind of unremarkable, and I love that about him. Douglas Gresham.
Yes,
he had this image.
We know he's our friend.
Yes, I know. I really am jealous that you guys have met him and I haven't.
Yeah, sorry.
But at least that makes me one degree of separation from him.
That's true. So that much closer.
Yeah.
And 2 away from Lewis.
Yeah. So I'm proud that I know you guys.
Yeah,
so that I
you
can
go.
say
yeah.
I'm just so many degrees of separation
Look
from
at
Lewis.
that. We're the entry point to the entry point for the rest of it.
But anyway, Douglas Gresham, he said that he had this, he was a young boy when he first met Lewis.
Of course.
And I think maybe you told me this story.
I don't know. Maybe I did.
But he had this idea of who is this author of the Narnia books that Douglas had loved reading. And when Douglas met him for the first time, he was underwhelmed about how ordinary C.S. Lewis was. And yet, Lewis said, "You've never met a mere human." And I think that's really true for Lewis. If you looked at him, you would say that's just a typical mid 20th century professor. And yet, I think maybe of all the different saints that I have drawn, he really exemplifies what faithfulness in the ordinary joys and struggles of life, what kind of glory there is in that. He exhibited virtues like humility. I think humility is something that really comes through in so much of his life. He had a heart not to communicate lofty theological ideas in a way that would impress his peers at Oxford, and he's a professor at Oxford.
Exactly.
He's not even a theologian. So he's really writing outside of his academic discipline, which in itself is a humbling thing for an academic to be trying to write popular level books in a discipline that he is not devoting his career
That's
towards.
right, yes.
Yeah. And yet he has the skill as an Oxford academic to write to everyday people in a way that he's not trying to impress. He's not trying to flaunt his knowledge. He's trying to take the beauty of Scripture and the Christian tradition and package them in a way that won't get the attention of the Oxford elites that can open academic doors for him. But he's trying to package them in a way that can open the hearts of the everyday blue-collar readers, the children, the normal moms and dads who are opening these books. I love that about Lewis. And in doing that, he's exposing these people who are living ordinary, normal 20th century lives and now 21st century lives to this beautiful tradition that was largely forgotten by the early 21st century. This tradition of enchantment, really. I keep using that word, but that word always comes to my mind when I think of Lewis.
Sure,
He's
no, we feel that.
re-enchanting the modern imagination.
If you want to see what someone's priorities are, you can look at where they spend their time. And so a very modern example is someone claims they want to do something, but then they are spending their time doing something else.
Yeah.
You can kind of see that, oh, maybe they don't want to do that as much as they want to do this other thing that they are spending their time doing. And I just read The Myth Makers by John Hendricks.
Oh, yeah. Was that good?
It was so good.
Yeah.
The thing that I loved about it was when I first heard about Lewis and Tolkien, I heard they hated each other, and that was it. And now that we've done this show, I've learned a lot more about both of them. And they didn't hate each other. They disagreed about stuff. Yeah. They actually loved each other, and they had different phases of their friendship. They had a great friendship where they were hanging out all the time for 9, 12 years or so. But then they also had a period toward the end of both of their lives that they didn't spend as much time together, but they still wrote to each other and communicated. And there's some beautiful letters and apologies that go both ways.
Yeah.
And one of the frustrations that Tolkien had with Lewis was that Lewis wouldn't play the game. He wouldn't try to get a professor position. Mm-hmm. He was spending his time doing other things. And one of the things he did was this lady wrote to him every week, which is a lot.
Yeah.
For someone who doesn't actually know him. And he wrote her back every single time and wrote lots of information and answered her questions. And she was just complaining about her family. She wasn't even asking a theological question or asking something about his work. And he replied anyway. And I think that was one of the things that took up a lot of his time. And we've talked before about how he would kind of moan when the mail came in.
I know that feeling because I feel it every time I open my inbox.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, and he was handwriting or typing and stuff. And but I love that I think he understood what he could benefit the world with, what he could give back, and he had this unique position where he had the ability to write and to read and take in so much information, but then also share with people. And his popularity grew and grew and grew.
Yeah.
And he maintained that humility and continued doing. He could have just stopped replying, and we would have fewer books on the table
with the whole collected letters here. That's
complete
right.
letters.
That's right.
But what a magical thing that those replies that he wrote, because he became famous, people knew to hold on to them, and now we get to see what those are. So it wasn't just replying to one person and then it goes away. It wasn't a waste of time. He was contributing to his work, maybe without even knowing it.
Yeah. I love that about Lewis. And he apparently responded to every letter he got.
That's right.
One of my favorite books of his, it's not my absolute favorite, but definitely top 5, is a little book called Letters to Children. And it's the letters that he responded to the kids who wrote him. It's a collection, and it has almost the tone of Mr. Rogers as he's writing to people, but he's responding to kids who have wanted to interact with the author of the Narnia books. And I love it. He has this way of communicating profound theological ideas, but in a humble and I would even say pastoral way. I mean, he wasn't a pastor, but he has this pastoral heart towards these kids that he wants to see them grow to love Jesus. Yeah. And he does it with gentleness. He does it with a respect for the fact that these children are actual intelligent human beings. And it's a beautiful book. He was also, just to continue answering your question, Daniel, about, what is saintly about C.S. Lewis. I think there was just also an immense generosity on his part, the way that he cared for people, the way that he contributed. He would donate money. He would donate clothing that sometimes people would mail him different things as sort of a appreciation for his literary career. And they would send him gifts, and he would so frequently give those things away to whoever might need it in his neighborhood. He also cared for family and friends with an immense amount of self-sacrifice. So yeah, there's all these little, you would see them and kind of say, oh, well, that's good, but it's not maybe remarkable. And yet, so much of the life of any saint, whether it's C.S. Lewis or St. Augustine or a saint that might be sitting across from you at the kitchen table today, so much of what comes with following Jesus aren't the remarkable, impressive things, but it's the daily, day-by-day faithfulness, and sometimes failing, and then getting back up and keep going. That's so much the life of a saint, and I think you can see that in C.S. Lewis.
The devotional I'm going through right now is My Utmost for His Highest by Oswald Chambers.
Yeah, it's a classic.
And he talks quite a lot about the drudgery of the day-to-day. And he said, a lot of people think, oh, I'm gonna give up all this for the Lord. He said, but what if the Lord actually just wants you to do the day-to-day stuff? And he doesn't give examples like this, but what if that means sweeping floors? What if it means keeping your job and staying where you are and not going to some foreign place and picking up everything? What if it means not sacrificing your life, but sacrificing your day-to-day life? And that it has way less appeal to me. Yes. But I also, there's something beautiful about that, where it is the day-to-day stuff that matters. And I think Lewis sets a great example of that.
Yeah, that's so well said. I admire, C.S. Lewis had a job at Oxford. So he was a professor. And I've actually been to Oxford earlier this year and took a bus to where his church is. Very ordinary church for that part of England. There's nothing particularly remarkable about it. C.S. Lewis didn't even particularly love the preaching there, but he faithfully went. And I then walked from his church to his house, and it was the most ordinary little English neighborhood. I mean,
was this the Kilns or something else?
The Kilns, yes. Okay. Yes, I walked to the Kilns, and beautiful house, but, very blue-collar neighborhood. And, he lived such an ordinary life. He didn't travel around the world all the time.
No, he didn't.
I think he went to Greece once.
That's it. Yeah, I believe.
I'm sure he went to France because it was probably close by, I think, but I can't even recall when he would do that.
Yeah, he just traveled mostly just around the UK and a lot of walking tours more than anything else.
Yes, yeah. So, yeah.
Did he go to the States at all?
No.
Okay.
Did not, no.
So just like what you're saying, it was an ordinary life of just day by day going about your responsibilities and duties, but doing it in a way that is completely inspired by the love of Christ and seeking to extend that to the other people you're encountering in your ordinary day-to-day activities. So, yeah, it doesn't need to be that much more complicated.
This is so inspiring to hear about Jack's life in this way. And, here we are remembering the day of his birth, which is really only, a week removed from the day of his death.
Yeah.
With that in mind, how should Christians respond on a day like this? How should we act? What do we do on a day of remembrance like this? What are historic things that Christians have done on the days where we commemorate saints and the Christian exemplars of our faith?
Yeah, usually when a saint is first commemorated or remembered or venerated, depending on what word and tradition you're using, it's usually a very local practice. Usually starts local and it grows. And it grows over centuries.
Sure.
So, for example, let's say you live in Rome in the 2nd century, or let's say Rome, 2nd century, 3rd century. That's where Saint Valentine was martyred. So, it may start as a local, like maybe the people who knew Saint Valentine will start to remember him.
Yeah.
And then over time, it may grow to all of Italy remembers Saint Valentine. And then traditions begin to develop. And now
The whole world does.
everybody knows about Saint Valentine, and we know exactly what to do on Saint Valentine's Day.
That's right.
Go look for a restaurant. You better get a reservation. You're like, it's funny how these things grow. Sometimes even the traditions grow bigger than the saint himself. I would say that's true for St. Valentine's Day.
Sure, absolutely.
Most people don't know who St. Valentine is. They don't
St.
know
Patrick or
St. Patrick. People think is a leprechaun now. And he's not at all. He's a bishop, English bishop who evangelized Ireland. St. Nicholas is another example. So sometimes these traditions get bigger than the saint themselves, and it's good to kind of be able to distinguish what's the tradition versus what is the saint. A great way, I would say, that's a Christ-focused way of remembering a saint is to thank God for his work in the life of that saint on the day of that they're commemorated. Usually it's the day of their death. In Lewis's case, it's the day of his birth. And what that can look like is something very ordinary and simple, is maybe in your morning devotions, where you're praying before you start the day, you just say, God, thank you for C.S. Lewis. Mm-hmm. Here's some ways that he's influenced me. Here's some things in his life I want to maybe adopt for my life. Maybe I'm feeling this sort of a antsy feeling, like I'm not doing enough, that my life is too ordinary. And maybe Lewis can remind you, follow the passions that God's given you in your day-to-day life. Put one foot in front of the next, and glorious things can happen. Mm-hmm. In the Book of Common Prayer, there are also prayers that can be prayed to God that are more formal prayers, that are thanksgivings for a particular saint. And there's one for C.S. Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
Don't know if you don't mind if I'd read it.
I'd love you to read it, yes.
But we've got this in the book. For every saint in the Our Church Speaks book, we have a prayer of thanksgiving to God for the example of that saint. And here's how this prayer goes. This is from the Book of Common Prayer. Almighty God, we give you thanks for the ministry of C.S. Lewis, who labored that the Church of Jesus Christ might be one. Grant that we, instructed by his teaching and example, and knit together in unity by your Spirit, may ever stand firm upon the one foundation, which is Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Amen.
In addition to that, though, Lewis, in terms of church history, Lewis has not been dead very long.
That's true.
Maybe in terms of other things like, I don't know, pop music. That was a long time ago.
That was, yes.
But in terms of church history, Lewis is a fairly recent saint. And so the traditions have not solidified yet as to what we do on his feast day.
It's
And
happening
so
right now.
you guys are helping to form what those traditions are. I think there could be things like having reading days,
Yes.
where you maybe read a favorite passage or a particularly influential passage to you about C.S. Lewis. I could also see if you have kids, maybe you could have them dress up like their favorite characters
Oh, I
from
love
Narnia.
that. Yeah.
Have a little Narnia party, perhaps. Or maybe just pull out your old copy of the BBC miniseries.
VHS tapes.
Yeah.
Watch it every year. Maybe it's that good.
Maybe we could wait till a really soggy day and have a picnic and say that winter is over.
So
You
really,
gotta do it on the particular day is the problem.
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, Saint Valentine, he's been dead a long time. So there's been a lot of time to develop traditions. C.S. Lewis, this is kind of up to us, and the
Yes.
folks who come after us, as to
Oh, I
what we're
love
going to do
this.
on his day.
Yeah, that's so great. It's exciting to think about 2,000 years from now, because I really believe that 2,000 years from now, people still will be reading and discussing Lewis.
I think so.
But, even a few hundred years from now, what does this look like is a really great thing to think. And I think it's a great place for us to end today. I mean, I know I speak for Phil and all of our listeners, but I just say, Ben, this has been fantastic.
Yeah, I've
this has
enjoyed
been
this so much.
much fun to have you on the show.
Yeah, this has been great. Thanks
Yeah.
for, first of all, thanks for making this book
Oh,
along with Dan.
Yeah.
It's so fun to have this. And my dad was on the show a few episodes ago, and he said, I told him about this book. I sent him a message. I sent him a picture of the inscription that both of you did, you and Dan. And I sent him a picture of the front and the back, and he looked into it. He loves books, loves Lewis. Big fan of George MacDonald, and reads a ton of stuff. And he was so excited that this book was coming out. He said, we need
so good to
more
hear.
books like this. And I think part of what he was talking about is we need to remember these other people, not just the recent
yeah.
people. And we need examples to follow. And in terms of people, no one's going to be perfect, of course, but this highlights some good things to follow within that Christian tradition. So I'm really glad that's here. But also, it is, and I wish we had recorded this on video, because it's so fun to watch you just go through systematically all these things that you've loaded up into your brain.
Yeah, Lewis said we should keep the clean sea breeze of the centuries
that's right.
blowing through our minds. That was in my mind as Dan and I were writing this book. That's what we want to do, is to keep that clean sea breeze of the centuries blowing through our imaginations. And yeah, if I could just add to that, the book, I've drawn the pictures and written the historical part, but my co-author, DJ Murata, good friend, he has written the devotional portions, and I think his devotional insights are just so good. He's a pastor, he's a counselor, and that really shines through. So you can approach this from a historical angle. It's also just, I think, the devotional reflections that Dan has added make it just a great devotional as well. So, yeah.
Well, we are giving this book a lot of high praise, and not just the book itself, but the entire project, Our Church Speaks, the website, the podcast, all of it. And so it only feels right to share this with others. And so we're going to be giving away...
One other.
Oh, yeah, well, no, two others.
Two
We're going to give
others.
away two things. We're going to give away a copy of the book to a listener, as well as we have got one of your prints that you did of Lewis. This kind of, would you call it like a modern icon? What do you call the illustrations?
Yeah, the illustrations are inspired by icons, but I'm drawing them digitally.
Okay.
And there is a very ancient and sacred practice for creating an icon, so I prefer to call them illustrations.
Okay,
just
great.
out of-
I will not
out
do
of
that.
deference to people who actually make icons.
Yes, absolutely. So
You actually even call it writing an icon. Not
I
drawing
didn't actually
an
know
icon.
that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So we'll be giving away one of those illustrations. It's a great print of Lewis, as well as the book itself. And so I think, Phil, I think we always love when people give us reviews over on the Apple Podcasts or Spotify. So if you do that, we just take your word for it here. Just shoot us an email. Say, hey, I just left a review. Or if you've left a review anytime ever, if you've already done it, maybe we've been around for 7-8 years at this point.
Yeah.
If you've already done it, just say, hey, I left a review before. And then we'll do, this episode obviously comes out on the 29th, and maybe we'll do on the 29th of December. We'll do about a month, and then we'll give out, we'll email people who send us those, and we'll send out a...
And where did they email us?
Oh, we had this problem last time we did a giveaway.
Critical detail.
We have changed emails in the last year. We are hello@lamppostlistener.com.
All one word.
Yes, and no the.
And it's hello, the American spelling, not
We
hello.
actually, that was another problem we had too, is we had someone say they emailed us, but they spelled hello wrong, which I didn't know was a real thing. So
Yeah, how would C.S. Lewis have spelled it? That's the question.
the right way. No. so absolutely, if you want to message us, we'd love to get the copy of this book in your hands. And if you don't win, let's turn over to Ben for one, I guess, final question here, which is if people don't win this giveaway, where can people find the rest of your work at? How can they support you? Tell us a little bit more of what you're doing with this entire Our Church Speaks project.
Yeah, so the website is ourchurchspeaks.com, and there you can find out more about the book and how to order it. But probably the best part of the website is you have a gallery of my probably 50 most recent entries, but I have drawn over 250 of these portraits of saints. It's a lot of them. And there you can find links to the Instagram account, the Facebook account, where you can see the full list of everything that's been posted. And in each of those posts, I have a little biography that I've written, as well as a prayer of commemoration of that saint, giving thanksgiving to God for that saint. So there's more information about the saint in each post that's linked on the website there. There's also information just more about the project as a whole, what inspired it, and sort of the mission statement for the project. In addition to that, there is also a podcast that my co-author, DJ Murata, and I host. We release a new episode every week. And on each episode, we are focusing on a particular saint that's commemorated in the calendar of saints. And we have guests on, including we had you, Daniel.
That's right.
Just a few weeks ago.
Not too long ago. Yeah, we had a great time.
And we talked about C.S. Lewis together. So
it only makes sense,
it
right?
Does. So if you want to hear us talk about C.S. Lewis even more, go over to ourchurchspeaks.com.
That's right.
And you can find the C.S. Lewis episode, and you can get a lot of, I think we talked about, I meant to count how many different books we talked about by Lewis.
Oh, it was at least a dozen.
It was at least a dozen.
Yeah, it was so fun.
So that was great. So we've got the podcast, we've got the gallery of art and the history, we have the book, and also there's information about how to order art prints. Mm-hmm. And then also you mentioned the wall calendar. We've just released the 2025 wall calendar that can help you keep track of the liturgical year and the saints who are commemorated throughout the month. So yeah,
it's really
12-month calendar.
Yeah.
I have one last thing I want to say about your book. I loved. So we were talking about how Lewis was an entry point for a lot of people. What I love about this book is that the pictures make it so much easier to just dive in.
Yeah.
There's nothing more intimidating than a big wall of text where you have no idea what's going on. But just looking at the cover and flipping through the pages, you can see how much diversity is within our church. And the outfits that you chose for each person, they communicate a lot about the person's culture, but they also may communicate a lot about the time that person is from. And it just draws you in. You just want to go and investigate. So I'd highly recommend, even if you also want to leave us a review, but I'd go ahead and buy the book, have it for Christmas. And
if you don't want to wait till
get an extra copy,
29th of December,
you can give that one to a friend.
Yeah, that's so good to hear. Yeah, I really hoped that it would communicate that the church is very diverse, not only in the different denominations that are featured in the book, but also just that we are part of a family from every era and place. And was trying to communicate that through the pictures, that you can see just every culture practically represented in the church. So yeah, glad that communicated.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, do you want to wrap us up with some of our end credits here to talk and thank the people who support the show?
I would love to. I have it right here.
Okay, I was handing it over to Phil, but he is prepared.
I am
for
prepared.
Once. No.
There's that thinly veiled contempt that they talk about.
And one final time, before we thank these other people who support the show, Ben, thanks again for coming on. This has been fantastic. So much fun.
Oh man, thank you guys. This has been a pleasure. I have enjoyed the podcast for so long.
Yeah, you've been a
and I
listener.
just can't believe I'm on it now.
I love it.
What
That's
a
great.
life
Are you going to listen
accomplishment.
to your own episode?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you ever speed it up so that you sound like that's how I get through it.
You've been doing it long enough. You should be okay with
I'll
the
have
sound
to
of
give
it.
that a try.
It took about 8 months, but I did get used to it.
I was telling you boys before we did this that I have to listen to each episode before we release it. And my children are coming to learn that Mondays in the car on the way to school we have to listen to Daddy's podcast, which my oldest is becoming very frustrated with. We already hear you enough. Like, what I have to listen to this?
I was going to say, there was a time before Daniel and I both had kids that we hung out a ton. And one time I was out of town and I was driving back and I was going to hang out with Daniel and his wife right after I got back into town. And I made the mistake of listening to a recording of Daniel the whole time. He was on a show with somebody. And then we were hanging out and I was like, I'm
annoyed with this guy. I need a break.
I just need a break. But now it's kind of comforting to have the voice of a friend in the car.
Yeah.
All right, in credit time. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month, along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to John Marr, Emily Wakefield, Ryan Smith, Andrew Trophy, Becca Brown, Christiana Line, and Ian Wooten for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to hello@lampostlistener.com, and voicemails can be left at 406-646-6733. Previous episodes, links, and book information can all be found at lampostlistener.com. We'd appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. It'd also help you have a chance to win a book
or an illustration.
No
icons.
No icons. And we'll be looking out for those, and we'll also be watching our inbox for links to those. Thanks for coming along on this journey, and we'll be back soon.